Hi, I'm Vincent Corella, Director of Licensing at Shockwave.com, and we're interviewing Kenny Dinkin of Play First today. Kenny is responsible for, I believe you're the creative director or are you the VP of the studio, Kenny?
I'm the CCO,
The CCO.
Chief Creative Officer.
Excellent. Well, we're going to be talking about Cooking Dash 3 today, which is one of the many successful games in the Dash series. And I'm going to give you a chance to talk about that game in a second. But first, I'd like it if you could just tell us a little bit about what you do at Play First, kind of beyond the boilerplate. What's your typical day like, and how much time you spend in creative mode on a typical day?
Okay, so I'm at Play First. We have three businesses. We have what we call the online games. Those are the ones you guys sell on Shockwave.
Right.
And we have what we call our iGames and social games. And so I head up the creative group, which mostly is game designers and artists. And those guys work in or support games being made for all three of those businesses. And I'd say about a third of my day is spent helping to run the company, sort of, executive-y stuff. And a third is spent working with people and hiring and manager-y stuff. And about a third of my day is spent focused on brewing up stuff, so more creative work, like helping set the vision for a product, working with producers and designers on the play mechanics, on defining the meta structure, on cooking up new stories, on casting voices, on looking over scripts or animations or storyboards, on redlining stuff, on leading a story development meeting, or potentially talking with the audio team about what the music or the sound effects might be, or the settings and layout for the game.
And how many of those decisions do you make, or do you help guide those teams to make such, like, for example, you're in a story meeting or you're talking about music. Do you come in and say, look, this is what I'm thinking for this game, go out and get it? Or is the team coming to you and say, Kenny, this is what we're thinking, and you're kind of just saying, you're guiding them along that process?
So, my philosophy is not, I'm not like a big sheriff's badge guy. Like, you get more magic when you have a team of people who care and are empowered and love what they're doing. So I don't see my job as to go tell everybody what to do. I see my job as to create a studio environment where people come up with great ideas and they can, talk to each other and to me and to other people who've experienced it before to get ideas, inspiration, direction, sometimes, just advice on what's gone before and worked and not worked. At the end of the day, we have business leaders here and creative leaders and technology leaders, and the magic happens when there's synergies between all of those groups and their leaders to recognize the best ideas and to create an environment where those best ideas naturally bubble to the top.
Well, you mentioned part of your philosophy there, so I'd like to get more into that. Can you talk a bit about your personal philosophy as a gamer and as a student of games? What are you striving for, and what is sort of your personal vision of games and game design?
I love this question. Okay, so I like to think of myself, what gets me up in the morning, what's exciting to me is feeling like I'm taking part in some sort of art historical trajectory. And the art form that we work in, video games, is super young. So I feel a little bit like the guys working in musical theater at the turn of the century. Like, there was no big Broadway show in 1910 or 1920, but people had aspirations to see musical theater get out of a kind of niche of opera and operetta and become mass market and mainstream. And I think that's the revolution we're living through today, right? That's what casual games and social games are promising. They're promising that interactive play, interactive design can be something that is mass market, not just for the 18-year-old with the baseball cap on backwards who wants a game about dragons and spaceships, but that interactive play can really broadly appeal as an art form. And so that's what gets me up in the morning. And the personal philosophies that then sort of get inculcated or driven into the games, I think, relate to that, because I believe in I have a couple of things. I like to think that the games we make, what we try to do, what we aspire to do is when we make a game here at Play First, we never situation where someone plays the game and then starts to scratch their head and go, wait a minute, why am I playing this again? And I think a lot of games tend to be like that. Like you play them, and there isn't sort of any larger meaning. They're kind of, I'm not sure why I'm playing it. And then I also believe that games are in fact a storytelling medium. And I think a lot of thinkers smarter than me talk about how 30 years ago, if you had said games are a storytelling medium, they would have said, what are you talking about? Games can't be a storytelling medium. But in fact, I think today we know, and especially from looking at the way that hardcore games and frankly casual games have evolved, that robust storytelling, interesting characters are a great way to emotionally engage and retain game-playing customers. So for me, watching the evolution of that, being part of that, is super exciting and sort of lends itself to sort of what is my sort of philosophical interest in the whole gig. And then, again, lastly, I sort of have a philosophy that even though we work in technology, to truly be successful, technology needs to be invisible. So what we do is take a lot of effort in our game design work to mask any idea that you're playing on a computer. In other words, we try to create immersive worlds, story and characters that have a sort of hermetically sealed set of rules for that world, so that when we offer narrative, it fits within a context or a set of restrictions and feels somewhat, even if it's a cartoon world, believable or allows for suspension of disbelief. And we try very carefully, we take great pains not to break the fourth wall of the stage, not to talk directly to a player or say, hey, player, click on the mouse, drag this over here, to not to remind them that they're on a computer or spit them out of the story environment, but instead to try to create that attention to detail around the world that surrounds the player and immerse the player into that world. And I'll shut up in a second, but I think that those philosophies and that kind of interest has seeped its way into our studio, into our portfolio of hit games, and allowed us to focus on going beyond like, okay, I hit game, and trying to and seeing our hit games become not just hit games but hit brands. Because the emphasis on character has enabled us to make brands out of games. And I include the Dash series and the way that, Flow has been able to spin out of it with Avenue Flow, but also I think Dream Chronicles, Chocolatier, Love and Death Bitten, all of these efforts have been driven by not just me, but by the people who work with me who are also passionate about, how do you make this feel charming from a narrative context.
Excellent. That's a great answer. We're gonna talk about the evolution of the Dash series in a second, but before we do that, can you just give, we are here ostensibly to talk about Cooking Dash 3. Can you give us, tell us about Cooking Dash 3 and why it's better than 2, and why our users should be so excited about, the release of that game?
Okay, well, first of all, whenever I talk about a game, I want to take a second and tip my hat to the team. Both the team in-house who worked on it here and our partner, Alias Worlds, who did the development work. People work so hard making a game like this, and then it comes out, and I think it's really, you forget how much went into it, how much blood, sweat, and tears. Cooking Dash 3, I'll give a short answer of like all the list of all the cool new mechanics that these guys came up with, including, finding items to get plates of food, stacking food, avoiding bombs, boots, and forks, the notion that you can click and fling the plates across the room to clear them, the mini games, flipping the plates up in the air. There is seats at the bottom of the table instead of at the counter, a dash-through window, but all of that stuff just makes the game just feel like really, on top of all the amazing production values, just like chock full of cool, new, fun mechanics. But then I'll just back up and do my favorite thing about the game is, and this we'll speak about this in a minute. We talked about what's challenging about continuing to work on the Dash titles is how fresh it feels, yet how familiar it is. And the way we got on that is cool. There's been an idea floating around the studio for a long time to do a flashback game. We call the characters in Diner Town the Diner Toons. And one of the ideas we've had is, what about a game with Flo as a teenager? And we call those characters the Diner Teens. Okay, so trying to figure out what's the right game to get the diner teams in. And this one just worked out great. The whole idea of an origin story of how Flo got her start in sort of food services, or kind of where this sort of piece of her puzzle fits in, and then allowing us to sort of look back in time at characters that you've seen and played with potentially in Diner Dash and Cooking Dash, but now seeing them 20 years ago, allowed the whole game to have a sort of fresh charm about it. And it's not just, Flo and Pigtails blowing a bubble with their bubble gum, or Mr. Big, with hair. It's, the senior, now no longer a senior, wearing like a members-only jacket from the 80s. Or the cell phone addict, instead of with a tiny cell phone, with a giant, enormous 1980s cell phone, and still being just as annoying, but having a mohawk. And the way that the play elements feel familiar, but the whole reinvention of the character set, by taking them back 20 years or so, enabled a real freshness, and then a lovely narrative about Mr. Big's first business, and spoof. One of the big themes about Diner Dash is this notion that it kind of spoofs corporate culture. It has this heroine who quits her job in Big Corp to go off and start her own business. So anything we can do to kind of spoof stuff like that is always fun for us. So the notion that Mr. Big's theme park was given to him by his rich dad, and he's blowing it, and he can't figure out how to make a mascot work, and his mascot is a dollar bill. So there's just a lot of the sort of humorous stuff that enables the narrative to come alive, so that as you're playing a game that you love and is familiar, and you're exploring some of the new twists and mechanics, you're also getting a whole fresh kind of a whole fresh immersion that takes you somewhere else and tells you a nice, tight little story.